Looks good.
Well, once again, everybody, thank you. I'm Leslie Burkus, the Executive Director with the Society of Municipal Arborists. As you can tell, well, maybe you don't know, but I'm a little stuffed up. I have a cold. People apparently still get those in the age of COVID. And so I was one of those people that got a cold recently. So I do feel a little stuffed up, but really happy to have you here with us today. So, today's agenda, an introduction to SMA. So many of you on the call today are members of the Society of Municipal Arborists, and we really thank you for your membership. If you're not a member, we'd love to have you part of this community. It's a great network of individuals who are making daily tree decisions, and we want to help support you in those decisions every day. After that, I'm going to kick it over to Jason Henning with the Davey Institute for the big show here to learn all about iTree and what can you do in an afternoon. You guys are busy city arborists, urban foresters, and you've got a lot on your plate. So being able to think through all of the tools within iTree and how you could just spend an afternoon, block off your calendar and work through the different tools, learn which one is the right tool for your needs, and then learn what some of the newest tools are is what Jason's going to talk about. So we really hope that you pick up some good information today. And then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A when we end. So notes about today. First, I'd love if you guys would drop your name and where you're from in the chat. We have a worldwide connection with people as members of SMA and people who join us from across the world. So let us know where you're from. Connect with people who maybe are in your neck of the woods and put your name and where you're from in the chat. This webinar is being recorded, and I will be sending that out as soon as we're done. Now that I asked that, I'm going to snooze those notifications on my end. So the webinar will be recorded, and I'll post it and send it to everyone when we're done. ISA CEUs are approved for this and will be submitted on your behalf. At the end of this webinar, I have a form that I will put in the chat that you can fill out with your name, email, and your ISA certification number. So that will go in at the end of this presentation. And then we have you all on mute, but when we get to the end, I'll take you off mute so you can raise your hand to ask questions. Of course, use the chat as well. Okay, so if you are new to SMA, or even if you're not, there's a little bit I'd love to share with you about the organization. Our mission is to build the confidence, competence, and camaraderie of all professionals who manage trees and forests to create sustainable, livable communities. And that's, like I said, you guys who are making daily tree planting decisions, tree care decisions, how can we help support you? And that's what the mission is for SMA. We were founded in 1964. We are a 501c6 membership-based organization. We have international membership, like I mentioned, and some I haven't checked all where people are from. I just saw Mexico pop up, lots from the United States. I know we have some folks on from Canada. So we have people from across the globe who are members of this organization. And we also are a professional affiliate of the International Society of Arboriculture, and we're a partner in community forestry with Arbor Day Foundation, Alliance for Community Trees, the Urban Wood Network, and many others, because we all see ourselves as playing a critical role to get more trees in the ground and more trees cared for. And we want to be part of that mission to lift you all up and get the great work done. A few reasons people decide to join SMA is to have a seat at the table. That's why a lot of people will join an association because they want to have their voices heard at different levels, federal, state, local, be able to have someone help lift their voice. So SMA is currently very active in the credentialing discussion happening around urban forestry. Not sure if you followed this, but there's some credentialing happening with the Society of American Forests, ISA, all focused on urban forestry. And we really want to make sure that we're helping speak for you and your interests are represented as that credentialing is happening. We're your representative with the iTree Executive Committee with Jason and Mark and many others who are on this call. We help represent on ANSI standards, the Sustainable Forestry Institute's Urban and Community Forestry Standard, and then advocating with allied affiliate groups like American Public Works Association and American Planning Association. Still trying to really dig into what that means with those other allied groups, but want to make sure that your voice, urban forestry, is being talked about with oftentimes the decision makers, a public works director or a planner who might be your boss or within your department. We want to be advocating at those levels for you. A few other things that SMA does offer is our Municipal Forestry Institute. This year, hopefully you've heard we're taking a focus year, so we are not offering the full course and institute in 2023. Instead, we're focused on strategic planning and alumni events, but we do plan to open registration mid-year. So follow along on our website. You can fill in an interest form on our website, and we'll make sure to notify you as soon as registration is open. Our Arborist Exchange program is dedicated to helping you travel to other forestry programs across the globe, across the US, across your country, wherever you might be. If you're a member of the organization, we'll pay all of your travel costs to do this. And applications are due at the end of the month. So if you ever had any thought about maybe doing an exchange program and going to learn kind of the A to Z of someone else's program, definitely check it out and make sure you sign up here by the end of the month. Otherwise, there'll be another round in November. Many of you are probably familiar with our City Trees publication. We're really proud of this. It's a well done publication, if I do say so myself. We've got a great editor who gets really wonderful stories in there, all dedicated to helping you have more information to do your job better. Latest issue just came out at the beginning of May. You see a sample of one of the articles there, all focused on different podcasts from SMA members and friends. This is an open access publication now, so this is something you could share with your constituents, or if you're a member of a or work for a nonprofit, maybe this is something you add to your newsletter. So we really want to get the word out about urban forestry and the work you're doing, so feel free to share it. If you haven't already, save the date for the World Forum on Urban Forests. That will be in DC the week of October 16th. SMA's conference is going to be interwoven with the World Forum this year. And if you've ever attended the Partners in Community Forestry Conference, that is what this is going to be this year. It's a little bit different. It's the World Forum only happens every few years. This year it's in DC. Hope to see you there, or maybe start budgeting, or maybe putting the little bug in your team's ear that you'd like to attend. Our next learning series, we're putting the final touches on it, so I don't have the link all ready to go for you yet. But this will be protecting and enhancing tree canopy on private property. Carolina Aragano, from an arborist with the city of Surrey, British Columbia, will talk about all the work they're doing to protect trees on private property, residential properties, which I know we all want to know more about. We feel like it's a tough nut to crack when we're thinking about urban tree canopy cover and how most of it's on private property, and how can you possibly help control trees coming down on private property. Well, City of Surrey is doing it. It's not without its challenges, but she'll be sharing that with us, and a lot to learn from her. If you are already connected with us on LinkedIn, it's a great way to connect with SMA and your fellow urban foresters from across the world. Great way to network there and stay up to date with SMA information. So please follow us there. And finally, again, if you are a member of SMA, we thank you so much. Your membership helps make things like this possible, our learning series. It helps make things possible like the Arborist Exchange, gets you the seat at the table, helps you grow your professional network. And we really love to have you here, and thank you so much. If you're not a member, I really hope that you'll consider it. If you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to chat it through with you. You would be joining your colleagues from around the world. You'll be with your people. I know how nice it is to be with people who think like you and share the same things, that challenges you're going through. And that's what we want to be here for. So really thank you again for joining us. I want to make sure we've got plenty of time for Jason. I'm going to stop sharing now, Jason, and I will kick it over to you.
All right,
Jason Henning with the Davey Institute. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Leslie. Yes, hopefully you can see my screen okay?
Yes. Yep.
All right,
looks good.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that introduction. We have a ton of overlap with SMA in all sorts of places, including we're going to be at that World Forum. I just got notice, I guess, last week that the presentation I submitted will be there, and I think we have a dedicated iTree Day as well. So we'll be there and can maybe meet some people in person. Seems like that doesn't happen much anymore, but yeah, so for today, I'll just jump right in. I'm going to talk about iTree and what you can do in an afternoon. Just by way of introduction, my name is Jason Henning. I'm with the Davey Institute, and I'm also in a cooperative position with the U.S. Forest Service. So I have desk in the Philadelphia Urban Field Station of the U.S. Forest Service. So we're in there with some Forest Service scientists. But most of the work that I do is outreach, tech support, and some development around the iTree tools, along with a little bit of urban forestry research. So and also just real quickly, we do have a couple other folks from the iTree team that are in the audience today. And if you have questions and put them in the chat, I'm sure they'd be more than happy to answer them there. I'll try and leave maybe about 15 or 20 minutes at the end for some Q&A too. But lots of what we have is online. So if you do have questions and put them in the chat, lots of times we can put links in there to help you out. And those folks are Dave Bloniarz with the Forest Service and Krista Heinlein, who is also with the Davey Institute. And we also have Mark Majeski with the Forest Service, who's currently leading the iTree project from that side. So I'll go ahead and jump in, and my plan for today is to sort of just talk about the basics of iTree. It seems like a lot of folks probably have heard of it before. Maybe you haven't seen it in a little while, so I'll try and cover some of that. Then I'm going to talk about 3 specific tools and how you can do this in an afternoon. And some of these are really easy to use, and some of them really might leverage some data that you already have. So I'll talk a little bit about iTree planting, which is a relatively new tool, last 3 or 4 years or so. And then we'll talk about iTree landscape, which is really our mapping tool. And finally, I'll come back to iTree Eco, which is kind of our flagship tool, and how you can use that if you already have some tree data at your disposal. So what is iTree? If you've never heard of it before, it's really a suite of software tools. And it sort of came about because there were U.S. Forest Service scientists working in the urban forestry sphere about 15 or 20 years ago. And they were doing work all throughout the country. And there were some folks who said, you know, it'd be a great idea to bring all this work under one umbrella and make sure that we can get it out to the folks. You know, originally it was really targeted at folks like you, urban foresters or municipal arborists. How can we get this information into their hands? And that's where iTree came about. So it's pulling in all that science under one heading. The role that Davey plays in here is that we do all the software development. So we take that Forest Service science and we put it into software that's hopefully usable by folks like you. Really what we're trying to get to with iTree is we're trying to estimate the benefit of trees. And we do this based on public domain science. So everything we do is peer-reviewed published literature or literature that we have links to up on our website. And it's a suite of free tools. So lots of times people say, hey, I'm using iTree, but really there's a bunch of different software tools in the iTree suite. And I'll kind of try and tease those out a little bit for you today so that you know kind of the differences between them and maybe which ones you want to explore further. We also provide technical support. So that's a big part of what I do. And Chris is also in the audience here. So you can email us and we will provide technical support for you. Anybody can email us. It doesn't have to be, you know, we support people at Davey, we support people at other tree care companies, and we support the general public. We support arborists from around the world. So anybody can reach out to us and we are more than happy to help. And finally, this software is continuously improved. So we get questions about that all the time, mostly because people will be using one of the tools and they'll put it down and not pick it up for a few years, and they'll see that their numbers have changed, their estimates of tree benefits have changed. And really that's because we're constantly improving the science that goes on in the background of the iTree tools. If you want to get to them if you just go to that itreetools.org, right on our landing page, you can jump into the various tools that we have available. So how does iTree work? I'm going to talk about this at really kind of a high level, but we have kind of this framework that we talk about, and it starts by measuring the structure of your trees or forests. So we do this really in 2 ways. We can do what's called bottom up. So that would involve taking tree measurements, typically at least DBH and species, throughout the area you're interested in. So this could be anything from just a residential lot, park, on up to city or watershed or even larger scales. But you're measuring individual trees at that point. That's kind of our bottom up, or you can do top down. So that's measuring the amount of canopy cover you have in your area of interest, typically from something like remote sensing aerial photography. So once we have those structure measurements within the iTree tools, we're going to go ahead and estimate the function of those trees out on the landscape. And there are different ways we do this. We can do things like how much are the trees shading buildings, or how are they interacting with air pollution? If we know that a tree, we know how many trees we have, we make an estimate of how much leaf surface area they have. We can then estimate how that's interacting with local air pollution. Finally, after we estimate those functions, we try to put a value on it. So this kind of structure, function, value model is prevalent throughout the iTree tools. It's really how they work. And with that value, lots of times we're talking about monetary value. So it's easy or relatively easy to put a monetary value on things like if we shade a home, it's going to reduce air conditioning use. We can put a value on those kilowatt hours saved. If we reduce air pollution, we can actually put a dollar value on the human health benefits of that. So if it reduces things like asthma incidences or lost work days, those are built into the iTree tools to estimate those values. And sometimes we do values that are maybe a little easier to communicate to certain folks. We try and convert it into something that people know. So if trees are taking up carbon, we can convert that into something like how many passenger car days is that equivalent to. So there are things like that that we do within the iTree tools, but really that monetary value is kind of the big one that makes it easy to kind of translate the benefits that trees are providing, that function, into something that people who aren't tree people really understand. So when we can put that monetary value on it, it really makes it easier to communicate the benefits of trees to lots of different audiences. So what does iTree estimate and why? So I talked about these, but we really have kind of 4 core ecosystem services or tree benefits that we estimate. One of those is energy, which I already sort of mentioned. So trees can act as a windbreak in the winter, which will reduce heating costs, or they can provide shade in the summer, which will reduce air conditioner use. And we can estimate the benefits of trees in that way. We also estimate stormwater benefits. So how much do trees contribute to keeping precipitation out of the storm drain? That's something we estimate within the iTree tools. Another one of our 4 core ecosystem services is carbon dioxide. So how much storage, so how much carbon is stored in trees, and then how much are they taking up each year? And finally, we estimate air quality improvements. So this is how our trees interacting with the EPA has criterion air pollutants. And this is how trees are interacting with those air pollutants, removing them from the air and the impacts on human health. So these 4 core ecosystem services are estimated in all of our tools, and we put a monetary value on those throughout all of our tools. The reason why we go with these 4 core ecosystem services is because this is where we feel like we have the best science. We have the best models for this. We have the best ability to convert those into monetary values. Within some of the tools, especially kind of our bigger tools, which I'll talk about in a minute, we do estimate some other ecosystem services, but these 4 core ecosystem services are common throughout all of the iTree tools. So I've mentioned this, that it's a suite of tools a couple times, so I'll just go through and kind of talk about what tools are in the suite. The big one is iTree Eco. iTree Eco is really our flagship tool. This is where all our research, all the latest science, all the newest data goes first. It's actually installed software, so you have to download it and install it on a Windows-based PC. But if you're trying to do a big project with tens of thousands of trees or a citywide project, iTree Eco is really the place where you're going to go if you want the latest science and the latest tree benefit estimates. But we also have what we call our core individual tree tools. So if you haven't seen iTree in a while, you may not be familiar with all of these. But MyTree is really our simplest to use tool. It's actually meant to be used on a mobile device like a cell phone. If you've never seen it before, I'd encourage you to check it out. Sorry, I've got a little bit of a cold I'm getting over here too, so I might have to take a drink of water in the middle here. But so MyTree, if you want to check it out, it's just mytree.itreetools.org. Feel free, even while I'm talking now, to pull it up on your cell phone. I always feel like it's better to check out the iTree tools while I'm talking rather than maybe check out your email. So feel free to check that out. It's a really simple way to get tree benefits for just a single tree or a group of trees around where you live. We actually use it a lot with in education settings, so showing kids how they can estimate the benefits of trees. iTree planting is another one of our individual tree tools, and these are all using kind of that bottom-up approach where you actually measure individual trees. I'll talk about iTree planting in a little bit of detail here in a couple minutes. And then iTree design has sort of been our longest web-based tool, and you can use that to estimate the benefits of trees to sort of a single residential property is really what it's targeted at. But then we have these core canopy tools. So these are kind of the ones that take that top-down approach. The simplest one, which is brand new within the last year, is called Our Trees. And that'll just give you essentially the benefits of trees in your city with just a click of a button. You essentially type in your address and it'll tell you what the tree canopy cover is where you are and the benefits those trees are providing. And again, that's a super simple tool. It's ourtrees.itreetools.org if you want to check that out. iTree Canopy, if you don't have an estimate of tree canopy cover for your city, iTree Canopy can get you there in about half a day. I'm not going to talk about it in our iTree in an afternoon presentation here, but it is another way that you can get to best estimates of tree canopy cover and benefits trees provide in your community in about half a day. So it's a nice tool as well. And then iTree Landscape, I'll talk about in more detail here as well. I know we do have some international users on the phone or on the call today. And not all of the iTree tools work everywhere, but iTree Eco, MyTree, and iTree Canopy work internationally pretty much the same as they do here in the US. So those are things to keep an eye out for as I go through the presentation today. And as far as what my focus is going to be for kind of the second half of this presentation is I'm going to talk about that iTree Eco, that flagship tool, iTree Planting from our individual tree tools, and that iTree Landscape from our core canopy tools. So I just want to provide some kind of real high level what goes on in the iTree models. And again, this is mostly specific to iTree Eco because that's our flagship tool and that's where all the science goes first. But essentially what it's doing is it's taking inventory data, and this can be either a plot-based inventory, a sample, where you're going out and measuring random sample plots throughout your area of interest, or what we call a complete inventory, where you're measuring all the trees that you're interested in. So that could be something like your street tree population. Within that, you have to provide some field data. So the key field variables you have to provide at least tree diameter, DBH, and tree species. You have to provide those for every tree that you input into iTree Eco and all the other individual tree tools. Beyond that, you can provide additional information. There's some crown measurements, things like how tall is the tree or how wide it is, how wide the crown is, or where the base of the crown is, or how much of that crown might be missing. Maybe that tree was pruned and some of the crown is missing. Things like tree health are also important. We can measure percent dieback. We can also measure building interaction. So how is the tree oriented relative to a building? If it's on the west side of the building, it's going to provide different and typically greater energy benefits than if it's planted on the east or the north side, just because of the direction the sun travels. And also light availability. So how much light is your tree getting? That's going to impact how quickly it can grow. Really, a lot of these measurements, what we're trying to get at is how much leaf surface area these trees have. That's the structure measurement that really drives a lot of our benefit estimates. So just keep that in mind as we go through here. But this is kind of the data that you will need to provide if you're doing an iTree project. But how does that fit into the larger kind of what's going on in the background of iTree? So when we talk about iTree Eco, you provide that field data, and it can be one tree or it can be a lot of trees. But within iTree Eco, we also have a whole bunch of city data for all the locations where it works. So that's going to be kind of everywhere in the world that we have location data. This is going to be things like what's the population density in your city? What's your latitude? So we can figure out things like how long is your growing season? What are the demographics of those people? If you have an older population, they're going to interact differently with things like air pollution than if you have a younger population. Sorry, I'm going to need to take a drink here. So we have all that city data for everywhere in the US going on in the background. We also have pollution data. So we have air pollution, a network of air pollution monitors, hundreds of monitors all throughout the world, collecting hourly air pollution data. So when you do an iTree project, you have to enter your location, and that's so we know which air pollution monitors to grab. So you're getting local air pollution data. We also have a similar network of weather data. So we have hourly precipitation data throughout the country and throughout the world. And again, that's going to be based on where you are. So if you're in wetter areas, you're probably going to have higher hydrology benefits, higher avoided runoff than if you're in drier areas. And that's because we have this database of nationwide and kind of worldwide data in the background of these tools. So all of that feeds into our location database. Nothing in there is anything you need to provide. It's just important to know that it's going on in the background there to give you really localized results. We also have a species database that's currently over 8,000 species. So when we talk about, if you're planting different species, they're going to grow at different rates. They're going to provide different amounts of shade. They're going to have different amounts of leaf area. So we have a database with all that information in it. Again, you need to provide that field data, and all this other information is already within the iTree tools. And from that, once we have all that information together, we can go ahead and estimate those ecosystem services. Sometimes we also estimate things like disservices, like trees emit volatile organic compounds. We estimate that in a tool like iTree Eco. And we also give you summaries of the structure of your forest, the structure of the trees that you entered, and again, that monetary value. And one of the cool things in iTree Eco and a few of the other iTree tools, including iTree Planting that we'll talk about in a little bit, is that we can actually forecast these over time. So we can project how those benefits are going to change going into the future. So just to kind of drive home this idea of how these tools are related, iTree Eco, again, is where all our latest science goes first. And it feeds into something that we call the iTree engine. So the iTree engine, we've essentially run iTree Eco, and we can then feed those results into our easier to use individual tree tools. So our tree tools like MyTree, iTree Planting, and iTree Design, all much simpler to use than iTree Eco. They're all web-based, but they're feeding off the same ecosystem service estimates that we do in iTree Eco. And then we have our canopy cover tools. So to get to those, essentially we run iTree Eco for every county in the US. And we've taken an estimate of how the amount of canopy in each one of those counties relates to the benefits the trees provide. So we create these multipliers. So for every acre of tree canopy you have in your location, you have this many benefits based on that county multiplier. And that's how we get our estimates for tools like iTree Canopy and iTree Landscape. So that's just kind of trying to show you the relationships between those tools. And if you're really interested in kind of the science behind any of the iTree tools, we have a document called Understanding iTree. It's a really nice document. It has really readable summaries that are about like a page and a half on each one of those ecosystem services. But you can go a whole lot deeper if you want to know any more details about kind of the science behind the iTree tools. So that's a really useful thing to look at, and it also keeps me from having to dive too much into the science. But from there, I do want to jump into those three tools that I mentioned, just to give you an idea of how you could use some of these iTree tools in an afternoon. So I'm going to start with iTree Planting. iTree Planting has become one of our most popular tools over the last couple of years. And essentially what it is it's taking a list of trees that you want to plant or are planning to plant, and it's going to project their benefits over time. So if you want to give it a try, it's just that planting@itreetools.org, or you can get to it from the homepage. And by way of sort of talking about an example of how this might look if you were going to use it in an afternoon, we recently talked to some folks in the community of Everett, Washington, who are interested in increasing canopy cover in their town, specifically focused on underserved areas. So one approach was to look at how we can get trees on all different types of properties. So they went with kind of this all hands or all lands approach. So how can we do this on public property? So they're going to put 100 trees on public property. Since it's public property, they can focus on putting trees that are going to get large in those spaces. Then they had commercial properties, so they wanted to engage commercial property owners. So they were going to put 100 trees on those properties, focused on community engagement. So really giving those folks trees that would sort of enhance their commercial properties, make sure that they weren't overwhelming the property. So those were going to be more mid-sized trees. And then finally, they wanted to engage residential property owners. So can we put 100 trees on residential properties? Really going to focus on energy benefits. So we're going to put those trees on the side of the house where they're going to provide the greatest energy benefits. And we're going to provide a range of tree sizes, small, medium, and large, depending on what residential property owners want to do. So if this was our plan and we were trying to get funding for this plan, we can actually run this through iTree planting. So we could start with maybe a real rough estimate that this is going to be something like $200 per tree. We've got 300 trees total. So the cost of this program might be around $60,000. So let's go ahead and put this into iTree planting. And this is exactly just a screenshot from iTree planting. This is what it looks like. Essentially, you're just putting in your planting list. So you put in your species, and I just picked out sort of examples, small, medium, and large tree species. And maybe this is mimicking that residential planting. So we've got this kind of diversity of tree sizes. Maybe we'll get 25 of those small ones, 50 of the medium size, and 25 of those large stature trees. We want energy benefits, so we have to put in this information about where the tree is relative to the building and the vintage of the building. What condition the trees are is going to impact how quickly they grow. We can also put in things like exposure to sunlight. Again, that'll impact how fast they grow. And then finally, this is how many of each one of those we're going to plant. So really quickly, you can put in actually quite a few trees, since you can just list how many of each species you're going to plant. And you can also put in mortality for this. So under this parameters tab up here, you can put in your project or annual mortality just to make sure that you're accounting for that. And this is what the results look like. They're really simple. They're easy to export to a spreadsheet so that you can summarize them outside of iTree, and you can actually save these projects as well. But it's just summarizing. Up top here, you can see our 4 core ecosystem services. So our carbon summarized in this table, our energy impacts, which has our electricity saved through air conditioning and our fuel saved through reduced heating costs. Our eco benefits are going to be our hydrology, so that avoided runoff and putting a monetary value on that. And so we can kind of summarize all those from those 3 different kind of planting types. So if I repeated that project 3 times for our private residential lands, those commercial properties, and our public lands, we can sum those up and get an estimate of the total return over time. This was a 20-year project timeline that I ran this out for, and we can estimate the return on our investment. So in this case, we get almost a $350,000 return in the benefits that iTree estimates on that $60,000 investment. So if you're trying to communicate why planting trees is important, or if you're trying to make the case to funders to fund a tree planting project, iTree planting is a great tool. You can use it really quickly. Half a day would be a long iTree planting project. You can get a lot of trees in there, hundreds or thousands of trees from a species list in just an hour or 2. So it's a really neat tool. I think it's really useful for a lot of approaches. And you can do other things with it besides just kind of projecting kind of a plan that you have. You can compare things like small stature trees versus big stature trees. So you can start to make that case that, small trees are going to give you small benefits. So we really need to be planting larger stature trees wherever possible. iTree planting is great for making that case. You can provide support for your approach. So if you have an approach where you're planting a diversity of species, you can see how those different species are going to provide benefits over time. You can include reasons for maintenance. So if I took that project I just ran, and instead of saying all the trees were excellent condition, I dropped them down to good or fair condition, you can see how the benefits drop off. And if you're going to lose $100,000 in benefits by not taking care of your trees, by allowing them to sort of fall back into fair condition, well, then you can make the case that maybe it's worth putting more money into that maintenance because it's really going to bump up those benefits. And you can compare species. So you can evaluate species palettes to see what's really going to provide the greatest benefits over time. So reasons to try iTree planting, it's really fast to use. You can just give it a try, in a few minutes just to see if it'll meet your needs. It really ties directly into funding for planting. So if you're interested in planting trees, iTree planting is a great tool to look at. It can provide justification for your design for why you're planning to plant trees in that way. And it's already used by a bunch of folks. So CAL FIRE actually funded the iTree planting tool, and they require it for their grants. So if they provide tree planting grants in the state of California, you have to run them through iTree planting so that they can use them in their carbon accounting. iTree planting is also accepted for LEED certification of landscapes. And there's new programs coming online all the time. This New Jersey Trees for Schools was a program that they just announced in the state of New Jersey on last Arbor Day. So just a couple weeks ago for New Jersey's Arbor Day. But you can put your plan into iTree planting, and that's how they're going to evaluate which ones to fund. Whichever ones provide the biggest carbon benefits is going to play a role in whether or not they decide to fund these grants using results from iTree planting. And you can also use it in reporting. So you can take, if you're already doing planting projects and you want to report out the benefits over time, you can do that. This is a program called the Giving Grove. They're tree orchards in a bunch of cities, and they run all their tree plantings through iTree planting so that they can apply them to their sustainability goals. This is an example from the Pennsylvania Horticulture Society on the left there. They get money from PECO, that's the energy company in the Philadelphia area, to plant trees. And they just run all their tree plantings through iTree planting so that they can show PECO invested $300,000 in 2019 to 2021. And this is the return on that investment using iTree planting estimates. So it's a really nice tool for doing those sorts of things. And it's really quick to use. And with that, I'm just going to keep plowing through these other ones. iTree Landscape is our mapping tool. So this is a screenshot from iTree Landscape on the right here. There's tons of mappable layers in iTree Landscape, and they go down to the census block group level. So this is sort of downtown Knoxville, Tennessee. And we've got layers in there of how much canopy cover do you have? What are those ecosystem service benefits? And then we also have things like census data. So how can we relate this to people? We have information about pests. So what pests are present in your area? We have information about historic redlining. If you really want to focus on underserved areas, you can look at things like redlining, urban heat island effects, climate projections. How is your climate going to change over time? So this is just kind of one of those maps showing census block groups in Knoxville, Tennessee, and which ones are sequestering the most carbon. Where are the trees sequestering the most carbon? But there's a whole lot more we can do with iTree Landscape, especially around prioritizing where we want to put trees. So one of the things that we've really added in just the last couple of weeks is we have what we call a climate and economic justice layer in there. And this ties into the federal government's layer that they call the CGES layer. And that's their website down there at the bottom there. So we essentially brought their layer into iTree Landscape. And this ties into, if you're familiar with the Inflation Reduction Act funding for tree planting initiatives, those are really targeted towards these CGES locations. So if you want to see, if you're applying for that funding and you want to make sure that where you're planting lines up with that, we have that layer in iTree Landscape. So you can go steps further than that. So iTree Landscape, since it knows where tree canopy is, we can make a prioritization about how we want to plant canopy on the landscape. So this is a prioritization scheme. Red means we want to plant there, we're more likely or want to plant there more intensively, and blue is less likely. And this one here is based around where we have available space and where we have a low tree canopy per person. So you can see this sort of lines up with our economic justice layer, but maybe we have more, and this is the city of Lancaster near where I live. Maybe we have more planting up here in this northwest corner than we really want to line up with our economic injustice. And that's because we're really not including anything around things like percent poverty or percent minority. But we can include those. So within iTree Landscape, we can prioritize around percent minority and percent poverty. And this is what this map is here. So you can see it's a much different prioritization scheme. It lines up much better with our economic justice layer. But this is prioritizing where do we have low canopy per person, high percent minority, and high percent of people living below the poverty line. So we can come up with a prioritization scheme that really focuses in on where canopy is most needed rather than kind of where it's easiest to put it in. And just another example of how that works. This is an example of how the folks at the Pennsylvania Horticulture Society use this. They get money to plant trees from the state of Pennsylvania through this Tree Vitalize program. And they work a lot in the city of Philadelphia, but the city of Philadelphia actually has really good GIS folks who can really narrow down where to plant trees in the city. But they also work in the 7 counties around the city of Philadelphia. So if you're in one of these smaller communities, this is Camden, New Jersey, this is Chester, Pennsylvania, cities of 100,000, 50,000 people. Can we get to prioritizations for those? So since they plant outside of Philadelphia, they need to decide where they want to put their trees when they're working outside the city. So they did this. They used iTree planting. They created priority index, focusing on percent minority, percent of folks living in poverty. And then they can rank all those communities outside the city of Philadelphia in those surrounding counties based on their needs. So the highest one is this Darby Township. That's just here, just to the west of Philadelphia, western suburb. So we can zoom in on that. So if we want to plant there, this is again information that's in iTree landscape. We have temperature differentials, so essentially showing us where it's hottest. This is that Darby Township right in the middle. You can see it here. This is the amount of tree canopy cover. And if we sort of look right through the middle here where it's hottest, this is along a road called McDade Boulevard that comes out of the city of Philadelphia. We've got the highest temperatures there. We've also got low canopy cover. So now we can zoom into a community where we want to plant trees. We can look at that heat island, and we can really zoom into even just a street where it's really going to be impactful for us to plant trees. It's going to have an impact on folks that really need trees. And it's also going to improve the landscape there where we know it's already one of the hottest places in this township that has a high need for trees. So iTree Landscape is great for doing those quick prioritizations. You can create a map like this in an hour or two and really zoom into where trees are most needed in your community. And with that, I'm going to jump over to our last tool that I want to talk about just to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. And that's iTree Eco. So iTree Eco really provides a whole lot more information than these other tools just because it's a much bigger tool. This also means it has a little bit of a steeper learning curve to get started with iTree Eco. So I always recommend people start with something easy. Try MyTree, try iTree Planting. And if that doesn't get you exactly what you need, iTree Eco has a whole lot of flexibility and can probably get you the rest of the way there. And iTree Eco can be really easy to use. So it does have that steeper learning curve, but you can still do a big iTree Eco project in an afternoon. If you already have inventory data, and this is an example here, this is a street tree inventory from the city of Rochester, Minnesota. This is where the Mayo Clinic is. If you have this data, and this is exactly what the folks in Rochester did, they had their street tree data. They said, we want ecosystem services for this data. We can import that into iTree Eco. It's actually become really easy to import data into iTree Eco. It's got this really nice import wizard. So if you've got a spreadsheet that has at least DBH and species, if you have some other tree measurements in there, you can use those as well. But so long as you have DBH and species, you can import that into iTree Eco. The first time you do it, it'll probably take you an hour or two. But after you've done it once or twice, you can really get data in there in a really short amount of time. We have a video that walks through this process on the website, and it's about 8 minutes long. So it's pretty quick to get even thousands, or we've done it up to about 500,000 trees imported into iTree Eco. And once you do that, all those eco services. So once you submit it for processing, you'll get results back in about an hour, and you'll have this wealth of information that you can use in all sorts of new ways. It'll have simple things in here like, your trees cover about 126 acres. So that's essentially how much shade these trees are providing in Rochester. And then we have all our ecosystem services. So those street trees, almost 10,000 of them, are providing $14,000 a year in pollution removal benefits. That's air pollution. And they're storing $645,000 worth of carbon. And it goes through all the ecosystem services that we estimate in iTree. It also includes a replacement value. So if we took down all these trees, how much would it cost us to replace them with trees of a similar species and a similar size? But it goes a step further. It's going to estimate those and break them out by species. So you can see How is our population divided? What percentage of trees are different species? But the cool thing that you can get out of iTree Eco that you can't get out of other things is starting to tie it to ecosystem services. So we can look at things like our percent leaf area. If you're providing more leaf area, you're providing more benefits. So rather than looking at just number of trees, we're starting to look at how are benefits being delivered. And iTree Eco just goes sort of into more and more detail. So you can have things like our species diversity, pie graphs, what percentage of different species do we have? But we can also look at things like diameter distribution. So this is, again, that Rochester data. And we can see that, those Norway maples, most of those are larger than 12 inches in DBH. So they're kind of aging out. They've kind of stopped planting them. And we can see what they're planting now is their new trees. They've got some Dutch elm resistant American elms that they're planting because they're down here in this smaller class. They're also planting some yellow woods, and they're planting some ginkgos. But you can see they've got Norway maples. They've also got some a bunch of green ash here, and they've stopped planting those for sort of obvious reasons. So you can really get a more in-depth picture of the structure of your forest using iTree Eco. We've got a lot of management focused results. So we can look at what percentage of our population is at risk to different pests. And what we're showing is that about, and these are in thousands over here, about $6 million worth of trees, that's what it would cost to replace them, in our street tree population are at risk to Asian longhorn beetle. So now you've got data to make the case to either treat or remove these trees because you know what's at risk. And then we dive into all those ecosystem services and we dive into more detail. So we can look at exactly how many hospital admissions are we reducing with these trees? About 57. So this is really important information in a place like Rochester, where you're tied into the Mayo Clinic, and you can show those health benefits of trees and what they're doing for the community. And lastly, we can do that forecasting. So we can project these benefits over time. And in this case, we're not planting any new trees. So essentially what we see is that our leaf area is going down. But we can start to run scenarios where we do plant trees, and we can estimate how many trees we're going to need to keep that leaf area up. And again, this is all stuff you can get to with an iTree Eco project, importing data in just an afternoon. So just to kind of sum this up with a few kind of real world examples, and make sure we have a time for questions here. iTree Eco has been used to do big projects. So an iTree Eco project was done in New York. And they showed the results to Mayor Bloomberg. They showed him the dollar invested in trees and the return on that investment. And that's really what drove the first Million Tree campaign in New York City, was this information they were able to get from an iTree project. And other cities do the same thing. They do this import thing. So I just came across an example from the city of Tempe. They have a street tree data set, and they essentially just imported it into iTree Eco, and they've actually exported it so that they have a public facing map, including all those ecosystem services that you get with iTree. So you can use that information to create these public facing maps to engage folks. In the city of Philadelphia, sometimes you do want to get onto private property. We can do what are called plot-based projects. So we do a random sample of plots all throughout the city. If they fall on private property, we measure them there as well. In this case, we did that for the city of Philadelphia. We actually pulled out just the park areas. So the city-owned park areas cover about 9% of the city, but they're doing about 40% of the carbon storage work. So in the city of Philadelphia, this really makes the case that we need to put a lot of effort into maintaining those forests. We're not going to do a lot of planting there, but we do want to make sure we maintain them because they're really doing a lot of work in the city as far as ecosystem services go. And from that same eco project for the city of Philadelphia, we pulled out just the ash trees. And this was a little bit before emerald ash borer got to the city. And they were able to show how much the city stands to lose to emerald ash borer. And that really made the case for treating some trees and proactively removing other trees and making a plan for what's going to come after ash, just from this same iTree Eco project that they had at the city scale. But you don't need to do projects that are that large. So this is just my last example here. This is the University of Pennsylvania. This is the Palestra. It's a basketball stadium here. This picture is from the 50s. These are some London plane trees out front. They recently did a huge green infrastructure project there. There's a big cistern under here. There's some rain gardens down here. But they kept up those 6 London plane trees in front of the palestra there. And this was a research project from a grad student there. And what she found was that these 6 trees store about as much carbon, 14,000 pounds, as the smallest 1,300 trees on campus. So she took this to the campus development board, and this made the case for we need to do a lot more to keep up our large stature trees on campus. We need to do a lot more for tree protection. We need to do a lot more planning when we're building on campus to make sure we maintain those trees. So there's a whole wealth of things you can do with iTree Eco, and you can get to most of them in an afternoon, especially if you already have existing tree data. So with that, I went a little bit long here, but if you need to get to any information about any of the iTree tools, check out our website, itreetools.org. We recently completed an iTree Academy, and all of that information is recorded. So you can get to lessons on each one of the tools I talked about today, and that's linked from the top of our homepage. We've got lots of video walkthroughs, and you can always reach out to us at that info@itreetools.org email down the bottom. So that's all I have as far as formal presentation, but it seems like we do have time for some questions.
Yeah.
Leslie?
Yep, for sure. Jason, that was so good. I have to admit, I'm one of those people who felt a little intimidated by all the tools from iTree, and I knew I would tell people all the science backed by iTree and how we could tell them exactly how much benefits we're getting, but I hadn't really dug into it, and that was really awesome to see, especially some of those tools from Eco. That's getting really in depth now, so great. Yeah, we do have a few questions in the chat, and I see that Krista answered some of them, but I might re-ask them just so that we can have everybody hear them. So let me scroll up from Rhonda. Does the carbon storage in iTree Eco also include additional carbon stored in soil if kept intact under functional forest cover, as opposed to just carbon in trees?
Yeah, no, we just do trees. So we don't have any ways to get data about the soil. So there's no input that would allow us to estimate soil carbon. We do estimate below ground carbon in trees, but yeah, we don't estimate soil carbon.
Okay. Yes, and people drop your questions in the chat. I also took you off mute, so if you want to raise your hand, you can raise your hand, and then we'll take you off mute there. From Dylan, is there any aspect of iTree that provides benefit value estimates provided by small shrub, ground cover, other woody vegetation when compared with lawns? Does that question make sense?
So we have tree in our name. So we don't do a lot with lawns, but if you've got woody vegetation, you can do shrubs in iTree Eco, and most shrub species are contained in our larger species list, especially here in the US. So you can definitely estimate the benefits of shrubs. And we do estimate ecosystem services of grasses, but again, grasses cover an area. It's not like measuring individual trees. So you have to do a plot-based iTree Eco project, and we'll estimate the air pollution removal benefits of grasses. So you could compare air pollution removal of grasses to air pollution removal of shrubs for sure. In all cases in iTree, it's driven by leaf surface area. So we actually have a publication where our environmental modeler did that. So maybe that's a useful thing if that's really what they're looking for. Maybe Krista could track it down and stick a link to that in the chat.
Okay. Ben asks, can iTree recommend the most suitable tree species to propose in an area under certain variables given?
Sure. So we have a tool that I didn't even cover in our core tools there that's called iTree Species. And you put in what you want as far as ecosystem services. So if you're really focused on carbon, or you're really focused on air pollution or stormwater, you can say those are the most important thing, or you can pick 2 or 3 of them, and it'll spit out a species list for you. The trouble we get into with certain folks is that it's it includes non-native species, just because it includes all the species in our database. But I'm sure all the folks on this call could filter through that list and decide which of those species they actually want, and it's going to rank them. So you'd be able to pick out which species in that rank are going to be most appropriate for your project. So yeah, that's iTree Species.
It looks like Krista put a link right underneath Ben's comment there. Or yeah. Another follow-up, is there any work towards values or benefits of trees and or shrubs to provide habitat and food for birds or pollinators?
Sure. So within iTree Eco, we actually do have a bird habitat model. It only includes 8 bird species, but they're kind of representative guilds. And so it uses iTree Eco data and it estimates how the trees contribute to improving the habitat. So in certain cases, they do for certain species, and for certain other species, things like robins prefer grass. So if you don't have some grass, you're not going to have robins. But yeah, so that is in there, and actually the scientists behind it are working on expanding it to more bird species. But yeah, that's within iTree Eco. So that's another one of those things where iTree Eco always has more, and it always has the latest science, and it's always getting improved first. So if you're looking for anything novel like that, iTree Eco is the place to look.
Let's see here. And then pollinators.
We don't have anything with pollinators yet, but the people doing the bird model are also do work in the pollinator space. They're big into the no mo may.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would expect that at some point down the road that might happen. Yeah.
Well, we have a few more minutes. If anyone wants to raise their hand to ask a question, please do so, and you can come off mute. Is there any way iTree can identify invasive species?
So within iTree Eco, we will list which species are native and non-native. Invasiveness is a harder thing to grasp. The trick is we need a database of what's invasive everywhere. Because since the tools work everywhere, we need to know, is that tree invasive in this location in order to classify it that way. So we're not quite there yet on the invasive thing. But yeah, we do have non-native status, so you can at least see that in your iTree Eco project.
Thank you. Another question, are each of the platforms connectable? Could I start a project on one and transfer it to another tool in the suite?
Um, No, not really. Since iTree Eco is installed desktop software, it creates sort of a whole different type of project. Essentially, the other tools, the online tools, were efforts to make iTree Eco easier to use and target specific problems. So iTree planting is really getting at how do I project the benefits of these trees that I'm planting over time? Because when you put really small trees in iTree Eco, you get really small benefits. But what you want to know is what are those benefits going to be over time? So those online tools are an effort to kind of narrow it down and make it easier. So there's not really a way to go back the other direction.
Mhm. How have you been seeing people use this for the Inflation Reduction Act? You shared a little bit of that. Any advice you'd give people for this most recent grant application, or just in general, because there's lots of opportunities, and you went through some of it, but curious what you're sharing with people.
Yeah, I mean, I think for these most recent ones, it's always making sure that you're focused on those CGEST areas. So focusing on those underserved areas that have been defined, on that CGEST website. So you can
And
get to those.
will you say what CGEST is, since we have some people from outside the
Uh,
US?
yeah,
If you
so
can,
it's
yeah,
climate and economic justice screening tool is
yeah.
the ST at the end, but really it's that climate and economic justice piece. So for the current funding, you really have to focus your projects on those areas. So making sure you're identifying them, whether you're using iTree Landscape or something else. And then, yeah, I think for me, it's always talking about delivering benefits rather than delivering trees. Because that's really why we put trees in the ground, is to make sure that we're getting the benefits that they provide to the people who live there. So I think that's really the strength of what iTree can add to your project, is that you can say those actual benefits and the monetary value that you're going to return based on any funding you may get. So I think that's true for any project.
Yeah. Well, we're at the top of the hour. That was really great advice. I hadn't thought about putting in trees as excellent and then downgrading their status to see what the case would be for potential maintenance. That's just like a really simple idea to be able to show what the need for maintenance. Lots of other great tips. Again, this will be recorded, and I need to get that link. I am so sorry. Let me copy this real quick. And I will drop the link in here for CEUs. It's coming right now. Oh boy, I copied it wrong. Hold on. There we go. Sorry about that, everybody. There is the link right now on a Microsoft form. I will include this in the email follow-up as well. That is if you want ISA CEUs. Again, thank you for your time, Jason. Thanks for your time, Krista and Dave, the others on the chat who are helping answer questions. Appreciate your time. We'll wrap up here. I'll stay on just to keep that chat open for a little bit longer, and hope to see you at the next SMA Learning Series or see you some other place with SMA. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.